I'm sure we have all heard of the Lincoln assassination, John Wilkes Booth killing Abraham Lincoln. But have you ever wondered who killed John Wilkes Booth? That man was called Boston Corbett. He was born January 29th, 1832, in London, England. He was kind of a nutball, as you'll come to find, but many people think that because his occupation was a hatter, and hatters are exposed to mercury nitrate, which can lead to hallucination and twitching. It's also known as the Hatter Shakes. But this did not stop Boston from finding love. He was soon married and had a child on the way. But his young wife died in childbirth. After that, he moved to Boston, where he became a drunkard and homeless. But one night, he was confronted by a street preacher who brought him back to God. He started to attend Fulton and Bromfield Street churches, where his enthusiastic behavior earned him the nickname, the Glory to God Man. Soon after he became clean, in 1857, he returned to work as a hatter and did well, but he would often stop and pray every time he heard a coworker curse. Boston also had a side hustle as a street preacher and was known for being a religious fanatic. Life was going good for Boston. He was clean and happy. One night, after a church meeting, he encountered two prostitutes trying to hassle him. He got away fine, but the encounter haunted him. As soon as he got to his boarding house, he read chapters 18 and 19 in the Gospel of Matthew, and it said, "If thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, cast it from thee." So Corbett knew what to do. In an act to rid himself from sexual temptation and remain holy, he castrated himself with a pair of scissors he happened to have. He then ate a meal and went to a prayer meeting before going to the doctor. In April of 1861, when the war was still new, Corbett enlisted as a private in Company L of the 12th Regiment New York Militia. He carried a Bible with him at all times, held unauthorized prayer meetings, and criticized his commanding officers. He got in big trouble when he criticized Colonel Daniel Butterfield for using profanity and taking the Lord's name in vain. Because of this incident, Corbett was sent to the guardhouse for several days and refused to apologize. He continued to be erratic and difficult, so he was court-martialed and sentenced to be shot. The sentence was reduced, and he was discharged in August of 1862. But Boston Corbett knew that he had a purpose in the Army, so he re-enlisted as a private in Company L of the 16th New York Cavalry, but was captured on June 24th, 1862, by Confederate Colonel John S. Mosby and sent to Andersonville Prison. While on the way to the prison, Boston committed an act of bravery that every soldier with him would remember. A fellow prisoner named William Collins later said, "At Macon, there were about 1,000 prisoners who had arrived ahead of us. The train we were on unloaded our 1,000, making it 2,000 in all. We were taken to an old pasture or common near the railroad tracks where a furrow was plowed around it for a decline. There was a small stream of water close to the guard line, and the prisoners made a rush for it. Most of them had had no water for many hours, but the guards kept them back. One of the more venturesome than the rest got through the line and attempted to fill his canteen. He was immediately shot in the arm with buckshot by one of the guards. He was pushed back among our men and laid under a tree. The wounded man was suffering greatly and called for water to ease his pain, but had none in his canteen. Boston Corbett stepped out of the ranks, having been unable to stand silent any longer. He crossed the deadline, filled his canteen in the stream, and gave the wounded man a drink. The guards continually threatened him with death, but Corbett ignored them and went on his business. Despite their threats, he returned unharmed and rejoined the ranks of prisoners. The cheers of the soldiers at this brave deed could have been heard 1 mile away, but Corbett seemed to think it was not out of the ordinary. It was the bravest deed that I had seen during the war. Corbett was released in a prisoner exchange in November of 1864 and sent to the Army Hospital in Annapolis, Maryland, where he was treated for scurvy, malnutrition, and exposure. When he returned to his company, he was promoted to sergeant. Boston's regiment was sent on the hunt for John Wilkes Booth, and surrounded Booth and one of his accomplices, David Harold, in a tobacco barn. Harold surrendered, but Booth refused, yelling, "I will not be taken alive." The barn was set on fire to draw Booth out, because the soldiers had strict orders to not kill Booth. Boston was positioned near a large crack in the barn wall. There he claimed to have seen Booth aim his carbine, causing Corbett to shoot him in self-defense. Boston's bullet hit Booth in the back of the head, behind his left ear. It then passed through his neck and out into the barn. Strangely, Booth was hit in the same area as Abraham Lincoln. This bullet pierced 3 vertebrae, partially severed his spinal column, leaving Booth paralyzed. Though shot in the same place as Lincoln, Booth suffered far more. While Lincoln was unconscious and unable to feel pain, Booth felt it all, repeatedly telling soldiers to kill him. Booth died 2 hours after being shot, dying from asphyxiation. When it was found that Booth had been shot by someone other than himself, Lieutenant Colonel Everton Conger asked which officer shot the assassin. Boston Corbett stepped forward, admitting to being the shooter. When asked why he defied orders, Corbett replied, "Providence directed me." He was then immediately arrested and sent to Washington, D.C. to be questioned by Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War. There, Corbett admitted to disobeying orders, but claimed that Booth was going to shoot his way out of the barn, and he just merely shot back with the intent to disarm Booth. Edwin Stanton discharged Corbett, calling him a patriot and saying that he saved his country a lot of trouble. When he was discharged from the army in August 1865, Corbett returned to being a hatter and continued his devout faith. When the hatter business slowed, Corbett became a traveling preacher. He then worked odd jobs and was repeatedly fired for stopping work and praying for co-workers. In order to earn some money, Corbett gave lectures about shooting Booth, accompanied by illustration lantern slides. He gave these speeches at regular places where murder was talked about often, like Sunday schools, women's studies, and tent meetings. As the years went by, Corbett believed that he was in mortal danger at all times, which I don't really know why, but the hate mail he received did not help his suspicions die. In January of 1887, Corbett was elected assistant doorkeeper in the Kansas House of Representatives, where he then had run-ins with political and public officials, often brandishing his revolver. Well, one day, everyone had enough, and a judge sentenced Corbett to a mental asylum called the Corbett Asylum for the Insane. But somehow, Boston escaped on horseback. That is the last true fact that we know about Boston. It is assumed that he built a cabin in Pine County, Minnesota. There he died in the Great Hinckley Fire of September 1st, 1894, though there is no real proof the name Thomas Corbett appears on the list of the dead and missing. So, there you have it. There's the Mad Hatter who killed John Wilkes Booth.